Hey, everybody, welcome to the Thoughtful Bro live streaming on a Mighty Blaze on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Back after a brief summer hiatus, but back in such a spectacular Massachusetts way with the man, the legend, Isaac Fitzgerald. Wait till you hear this, especially all y'all from Massachusetts, and I know you're out there. A few words before we get started. A Mighty Blaze, for anyone who has been living under a rock for the last 2 years, is an all-volunteer initiative to help writers reach readers virtually during COVID and beyond. At a Mighty Blaze, we are not ever asking for money. If you want to support us, you can just like us, follow us, tell your friends about it, watch our other shows, go to amightyblaze.com and sign up for our newsletter. As I said, all this fantastic content is completely free. But if you are in the mood to spend money, please spend it on books that discuss the greatest of all American states, the land of dirty water and Dunkin' Donuts, the Commonwealth of Cape Cod and Cumberland Farms, this paradise of grinders and heroes. Books like
Mark!
Dirtbag, Massachusetts. Yo, man, I'm inspired.
Bravo!
I'm inspired today. I'm spitting fire.
That was beautiful. Will you email me to that? That was incredible. Did you say Cumberland Farms? Did Cumberland Farms get in there?
Of course, Cumby got in there.
Nicely done, Mark. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was overcome with emotion.
Oh my God, not at all. I hope you didn't spill your drink.
Just a little bit. All
right, good. All right. So, folks, if you have a question for Isaac, please just post it in the comments and it will make its way to me. We will pop it up on the screen and we will ask at the end. But now on to the introduction. Isaac Fitzgerald appears frequently on the Today Show and is the author of the best-selling children's book, How to Be a Pirate. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Best American Non-Required Reading, The Boston Globe, and more. His debut memoir, Dirtbag, Massachusetts, is currently #1 on Amazon's new release essays list. It was an Insta New York Times and USA Today bestseller. Esquire said the book is, quote, the best of what memoir can accomplish. And the New York Times said Fitzgerald nestles comfortably on a bar stool beside Kerouac and Bukowski. The book's charm is in its telling of male misbehavior and occasionally the things we men get right. And this is perhaps my favorite blurb of all from Roxane Gay. Quote, this book is full of dirtbag swagger. Let's get that dirtbag swagger. Isaac.
Sorry, go. But
no, hey, welcome to the show.
When she said that to me, like, you got to know my jaw was just on the floor. Like, such a perfect phrase. Like, one of those things where I'm like, that's it. We can just shut it down now. Dirtbag swagger, incredible phrase. Thank you, Roxanne. So that was an incredible day.
Like, that should be a dance. Like, I want to do that dirtbag swagger. Let's do that dirtbag swagger.
Just get it going. Just make it, a little dance sensation that sweeps the nation. But yeah, no, that was an incredible one. But Mark, thank you so much for having me on the show. Thank you for all the work that you do. Like we were just talking about, kind of getting books and authors out there, especially during the pandemic, and doing events like this that live on the internet so that people from all over who maybe don't have access to book events in a local city or something get to see them. So thank you for doing this, Mark.
Hell yes. And like I said, you were always on my radar. Like, I mean, it was like, I feel like people were like telling me to interview you on my show, like before you even wrote the book. I felt like it was like years ago. People were like, make sure you get Isaac. And then it was actually like people on social media were like, tagging me on Twitter and saying, you two need to be together, like da. And so anyway, I'm so glad it's finally happening.
Might be related.
We might be.
I'm not. We are from a similar area. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're from like Central Mass. I actually, what's interesting is like we sort of like are converging. Like you live in Brooklyn now. I used to live in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. I lived in San Francisco from 2008 to 2010, and I think you were there too.
Mark, I bet you we were in the same room. I bet you. I'm sorry, 2008 to 2010.
Yeah.
I'm listen. San Francisco, one of my favorite cities, beautiful city, but it's only 7 miles by 7 miles. It's not a really big city land-wise. And so I would almost assume that we were in the same room. That's incredible. And then you came back east?
And then I came back east. Yep. Came back. Couldn't get enough of the Cumby and Cape Cod, as they say.
That's a beautiful, beautiful way to put it. But wait, all right. So hang on, because I'm gonna get stuck interviewing you, which I do love to do a little bit of. Can you talk just real quick about like, were you going out there for literary stuff? Were you going out there for a job?
Oh, just real quick. I worked for Reuters. That was my job. I was a journalist. And so I went out there. I mean, the real reason why we went out there is my wife was like, I've always wanted to live in California. Let's just go try it. And we were young, didn't have any kids. We were just like, hey, let's do it. But then, you know, I mean, my family's all out here in Massachusetts still. So that eventually we were just like,
no, it's the same thing that's the same thing that I was out there for almost 10 years, but that's the same thing that brought me back. My brother had his first kid and I was like, I'm gonna be the weird uncle. Like, that's just without a doubt. I don't want to be the weird uncle who's 3,000 miles away. You came back. I love that.
Awesome, bro. All right, well, look, let's get into this, and it's got to be me interviewing you because, you know, I was saying on social media leading up to this that you were just like one of the great evangelists for books that we have. And I mean, you have worked for Rumpus, McSweeney's, BuzzFeed. I mean, you're on the Today Show talking about books. And, you know, it's funny. I was like watching a clip of you recently, like on the Today Show. And like every time, I think it was Willie Geist or something, like every time they brought up a book, you did this little gesture. You were like, you know, they were like, let's talk about the Hunger Games. You were like, I mean, you didn't even know you were doing it, but it just shows. It's like, I love this. I can't wait to talk about this. And like, that's how I feel about books on my show. And so I just recognize that and I love it.
First off, I love that you watched the tape. I love that you like got those books. But no, that's 100% what it is. Like, I mean, they make fun of me. I want to just be real honest. When those cameras come down, you think Al Roker is busted on. He's just like, how many coffees did you have today? They're like, I mean, I'm not going to name names, but one person is that, you know, in this crew, and there's all these different folks around, but one person's like, I don't even really like to read, but you like make me want to go buy a book, like, which is a wonderful compliment because that's the most exciting thing for me. You can bring a new reader in, but I'm telling you, when you know, because you just do the quick segment, but when those cameras go dead, they are just literally every time they're like, so like, what are you like? Let me like, we need some of that energy, right. And I get like, and to be honest, what it is it's a little bit of nervousness too. I've been doing it for almost 7 years now, which is wild. You think I'd get used to doing live television because I've done it so much, but every time it feels like the first. I'm telling you, like in the back room, I'm kind of like, I just got that. I'm like, and I get freaked because
you're doing the Dirtbag swagger,
exactly. But no, I appreciate that. Like it is, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Mark. It's a joy for me to cheerlead books. Like I love books. I love the books community. None of us are in this for the money. And if we are, have we made a terrible mistake? But the joy of it can be, you know, coming across books are so important to me. I'm sure the same for you. Some people come to books later in life. I myself grew up a reader. I was very lucky that it was a gift that my parents gave me, but I just love the technology. It's just somebody writes it and then it takes a reader to engage with it, to bring it to life. You know, you're bringing your own memories to a book. So when I write something about a bar or something, you're maybe not imagining that bar. You're imagining some other bar in your head. But that's like, I just love this kind of two-person art form that happens when reading happens. So to be able to go on national television, or whether it was through the Rumpus, through BuzzFeed, through McSweeney's, to basically grab somebody's shirt sleeve and say, hey, no, check this out, read this. Like, that's a great joy for me. And clearly you share that as well.
Oh, 100%. And it just makes me happy. I mean, like another thing that I would just say is that like, I know how hard it is to write a book. I mean, my first book is coming out in a year and a half and that's great. But, you know, I've been on this road a long time and I just feel like anybody who makes it to the finish line, anybody who even gets a book published, like I could never be a critic because it would be like a veteran kind of like criticizing another veteran for going through a war. You know, I mean, it's just so hard to create a book and then get that book out there. Just so much respect for anybody who's crossed that finish line.
No, 100%. I mean, for me, I'm just going to say this, like for me, I do believe criticism is an important art form that's part of the environment. Like I love that it exists because I think such good conversations come out of it. But yes, for me personally, like I'm like, hooray for that. But yes, personally, I have a very hard time because of what you're saying exactly, which is like, you understand how much struggle went into this thing. I love that there are good critical conversations that happen. But personally, the things I'm interested in are the things I can pick up and say, I love this. I think you will too. And that's the connection for me, for sure.
100%. So before we get into talking about your book, which I loved and I can't wait to talk about, just talk to me about the book community, because like a theme actually in your book is this need for community, the craving for community. I mean, like we all need community, but when somebody comes from a family that had so many difficulties like yours did, I mean, the need for community is just even greater. And here, I think that one sustaining thing throughout the arc of this book and everything that you've lived through in your wild life is like the sustaining nature of the book community. So could you just talk for a second about what that book community is and what it's like and how what it's meant to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna like touch on the book for a second and then dig down into the book's community for sure. But it's just so wonderful to hear that broke through. But you'll know this too, as somebody who's obviously writing your book or written your book. Things come out that you don't even realize are coming out. And that's another incredible part of the reading process is other people get to read your story and then they get to tell you what they took from it. So very early on, people were telling me, wow, a lot of the things that we're seeing here is somebody searching for home and somebody searching for community. And I would love to tell you that I was like, yes, and I perfectly weaved that through this narrative. But like, it was just, that was, I think, the story of the life that I was living. So it just kind of came out. So for me, I grew up in an unhoused shelter in Boston. And that, we can talk way more about that. I promise not to go on a 20-minute long answer right now. But that first 8 years of my life, on paper, you would look at my childhood and you would think, those must have been the roughest years of his life. But they were actually the best years of my life because I was surrounded by community. I was surrounded by so many different characters and people of different walks of life. And it just really filled my imagination. It filled my head. It filled my heart. I felt very, very lucky to grow up in that situation because it was run by the Catholic worker, which is like very much not the institution of the Catholic Church, but very much the faith of of Catholicism, which is, it was a way of saying it's very socialist. It was started by Dorothy Day. We can get into all that in a little bit. But because of that community throughout my life, like I said, I think it's the story of my life without me not really realizing it, is I was always searching for that community as I went through my 20s, as I went through my 30s. I was trying to find that same sense of community that I had in my childhood in juxtaposition against when we moved out to the country and then I lived a much more lonely life. So because of that, the book's community has probably been a community that I've been a part of the longest. Like I have incredible community that I talk about in the book in different bars and different other situations. But the book's community is probably the one that I've been in other than Catholicism. And again, lapsed Catholic, still talk to this guy from time to time, though, let's be honest. But I would say the book's community is probably one of the longest running communities that I've been a part of. And just to give you like a little story there, the way I came to it, I was raised with books. My parents failed me in a lot of ways, but they really gave me the gift of reading. They really gave me a love of literature and books, and I'm so grateful to them for that. So I grew up going to the library. When we move out to the country, I would ride my bike to the next town over because that was the only place that had a bookstore. So independent booksellers, librarians, they mean the world to me because those were the spaces I felt safe in. Those were the spaces that I could even run away to a little bit. And like basically, especially this bookstore, that deal was kind of like, you don't steal anything from us. You can kind of just sit around and read all day. So it was incredible to have that kind of early connection to the book world. But it wasn't until later in life. So I'm reading, I'm always reading. At the age of 23, I end up in San Francisco. And this isn't in the book. I don't talk about this in the book. Because again, I wanted to focus, I think, on my childhood. Some people have mentioned this. They're like, no, you don't really talk about how you became a writer. So this is one of those key moments, I think, for my journey. I'm 23 years old, and I have moved out there to date someone who I think was pretty surprised I showed up. I think they were a little bit like, hello. I thought it was just a nice phone call, but here you are. Okay. And they, after a couple of days were like, we got to find something for this guy to do. And so they saw the sign. It said storytelling and bookmaking workshop. And they were like, you love stories? You love books? Why don't you go down there? And I had written some bad poetry, but never in my life had I dreamed that I could be a writer. At that point, a lot of my education, let's be honest, was dead white men. And I thought a lot of it had to do with like whether you had the gift or not. I thought it was I thought it was like God touched you. You lived in an ivory tower and you just typed up these beautiful pages. You sent them to New York. They put a cover on it. You're a millionaire. That's what I thought it was. Then you die. Obviously, none of that's true. But I walk into this space and very quickly I realize that this is for kids, not for adults. And that what is going on is a meeting to try, an open house basically, to try and get adults to join this kids center. And it was a free writing and learning center. It's called 826 Valencia. There's 826 Boston. We're all very familiar with it. Dave Eggers, Brenda Levita, Ninda Bay Calgary. They started it. Anyways, I'm sorry, it's a long answer. I lied about it not being long answer, but I'm getting to the point, which is in that space, there were pages that were framed on the wall. And I raised my hand. I said, what are those? And they were covered in all these in all these ink markings or pencil markings. And they said, oh, each one of those is a page from a manuscript of a book that actually got published. And it's to show the kids that while writing is a very solo art form, if you find editors or teachers or friends or family members or even volunteers here at this center to give you feedback on your work, you can make it better. Yeah. And in that moment, it was I was 23 years old. I was like, yeah, we should teach 8-year-olds this. And I was like, I'm sorry. What? It was the first time it clicked for me that maybe writing could be a craft. Maybe writing is something that I could get better at. And most importantly, writing is something, if you found your community, that community could help you make it better. So that's a very long answer, but that is what the books community gave to me, was this in to this dream that I'd had forever that I'd barely even been able to speak aloud. And it was only through, you know this, you get to then talk to your heroes. You get to then get front row seats to watching as people go from an idea to actually publishing a book. And then you sit there and you fret with your own insecurities or, oh, maybe I can't do it. But years and years and years of being a member of the books community is how this book got made. Sorry, long answer. But
no, I love it.
It means everything to me. To answer the question, book community means everything to me.
And just moving from the books community into books themselves, I mean, square this apparent contradiction for me. I mean, so much of this book is about how rough and tumble those early years were for you, not just emotionally in an abusive house, but, there's a shooting that, is kind of outside your house. You are like fighting people all the time. I mean, it's super violent. You and your friends getting in fights all the time. There's tons of indiscriminate sex, there's drug and alcohol abuse, all sort of almost before you like turn 16. And it's just such a wild, hard scrabble portrait you paint. And yet books are at the center of your life. And it's sort of a softball question in a way, but it's because what I'm tapping into is the apparent contradiction between that kind of hard scrabble, basically it was sort of, this is probably a poor way to say it, but it's sort of like a rock and roll life you lived. Mm-hmm. But here's books and ideas always at the middle of it. How does that work? Why is that not a contradiction?
No. So for me, I mean, there's many different ways to answer that, but the place my brain first goes to is escape. That's what it was all about for me, was escape. So I come to drugs very early in my life. I come to drinking very early in my life. It's very complex, and I write about in the book. I don't want to do it a disservice here, but to kind of give it a shorthand, like even sex, I used sex very early on, not for intimacy, not for real connections, but as a way to almost get out of my body for a little while. And those were all ways in which I could escape, not just my surroundings, but my own mind. But especially as a child, it was a way of basically immediately being able to not remember what was going on around me. At the same time, I have these parents who do really care about education, who do really care about books. A lot of other stuff is going haywire, but it was important to me. And I also learned at a very early age, if I came home with good grades, then I could kind of do whatever I wanted. As long as the grades were hitting, I could kind of do whatever I wanted. So that's what I started doing. I was actually and I remember I would try to keep it quiet. I would try to keep it quiet at school, that I was doing good at school, because I was like, I don't want to be seen as some nerd, which is we don't even need to get into the whole horrible, thoughts around all that. But no, basically I would like try to keep it quiet, but I was doing well in school as a way to do kind of whatever I wanted. So my parents are giving me these gifts of books. And like, let's be honest, every kid, even with the hardships, even with how difficult I was having a time to relate to them, I still wanted to impress them. I still wanted them to love me. And books kind of felt like this only way to communicate. Not to, just real quick aside, for a long time in my 20s, I was estranged from them. But as I started coming back into their lives, something we would do is just go to bookstores. Because it was a place where we didn't really have to talk to one another. But we could each go and like get our own thing. And then it'd be like, oh, what do you think of this one? What do you think of this? Oh, I've actually read that one. It became a language between us where we didn't really have to talk about the real stuff, but we could always talk about these books. And I'm actually very grateful because I think those conversations then led to the more important conversations. But so, yeah, for me, books, it's weird to categorize them along with drugs and alcohol. But what they gave me at a very young age was an escape. I would just get out of my house and I could just go read a tattered copy of whatever I was reading, whatever I'd bring home from the school library, whatever I'd find at the local public library. And that also got me out of my situation. So just in the same way that I leaned on alcohol and drugs, I was leaning on books. Now, books, of course, a bit more of a healthier approach. Maybe didn't need to do all of them, maybe, but I feel very lucky in that as I've grown older, I did get drawn in a way more towards books. I'm don't get me wrong, I still drink, but it hasn't become a whole lifestyle for me in the way that it used to. And that what has become a whole lifestyle is books. So I feel really lucky about that.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. I mean, we've been spending the whole first part of this interview talking about the book community and what books mean to us. And the reason for that is like, I just really relate. And I just feel like, some people get it and some people don't. And it's just, you gotta like just find other people who are crazy about books. And then you don't feel so crazy anymore because you're like, these are people who are just like me. And that's just meant a lot in my life too.
Yeah, and you find your people. And the beautiful thing about the books community is how diverse and different everyone is. And I'm talking about all sorts of different versions of diversity. But when you come and you meet somebody and you have the two favorite books, like that's an amazing moment. Even if you don't have anything else in common, like boom, there it is. Because both of you are connecting to something in there, and that's your starting place to like move forward in whatever relationship you're going to have with that person.
Totally. And I find that like people, at least the people I talk to, when they're passionate about a book, it's way different than people who are like passionate about a movie or a TV show or something. I mean, people get like rabid about the books that they really love. But look, all right, let's move on to the book itself. So to prepare for this interview, I was thinking about what are great books set in Massachusetts. And I was thinking,
great question.
The Scarlet Letter, Moby Dick.
An OG classic.
Moby Dick.
Absolutely, we love it.
Walden,
yeah.
The Crucible by Arthur Miller. I mean, this is like basically, you can like probably have half of the canon of American letters is set in Massachusetts. But I would just say, I never saw myself in any of those books. But when I read this, it was this feeling that like, being from Central Mass, I grew up in Worcester. It's like to just see somebody talking about where you're from and like making art out of it and making it just like interesting and beautiful and whatever. I don't know. It was a strange feeling, and it's a feeling that that I don't always get. But I particularly liked seeing that. I felt like this is my Massachusetts.
Well, and that's the beauty of again, not to keep coming back to that, but that's the beauty of books too, right? There's so many different stories, in all places, in just all places, wherever you pick, spin the globe, put your finger down. There's gonna be very different versions of that same place as different humans experience that space. So here we are, we're literally joking that maybe we're related. Like we come from a similar place where I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that we're of a similar age. So we came up during a similar time. Like we were just talking before we got started here, but like Worcester has cleaned up a lot. It's a different place than when you and I were, when you were growing up there or when I would go visit Worcester, right? And so it's kind of amazing that one, the different stories that can be told in any different place, but two, that when somebody writes that book, where you're like, oh, you saw it that way too. There's that instant connection. And for me, there's two books that come to mind that did that for me growing up. And one was the collected works of Brice de J. Pancake, which is wild because he wasn't writing about Massachusetts at all. It was Virginia, West Virginia. but there was a class element to it that I just connected with so much. I also, surprise, surprise, not really a spoiler for the book, but was like a pretty depressed kid and was dealing with the suicidal ideation and all this stuff. And Brista J. Pancake had a story that had mental illness at its core. And so I think there was a part of that. Like not just the book and the writing, which is so beautiful and incredible and spoke to me in such a real way, but his life story in this interesting way kind of reflected a lot of the feelings that I was feeling. So I almost grew enamored with the writer himself, with his life story. And then the other one, which is much more close to home, I'm sure this won't surprise you. And I was wondering if you came across it when you were younger, if it's one that you've read, but Another Bullshit Night in Suck City.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And that for me was the first Massachusetts book, especially because I grew up in this unhoused situation. Like, I'm pretty sure when I was a kid, me and Nick Flynn were maybe in the same rooms. And so like when I read that book, it just like that, and I don't use this word lightly, like it became my lodestar. Like it was a map. It got like, there's no Dirtbag Massachusetts without Another Bullshit Night in Suck City. Because when I read that book, I was like, wait, if this person can do it, maybe I can do it too. And that's such an important moment, both as a reader, but as a writer.
Yep. So there's so many stories that you have. And I mean, folks, this is like the life that Isaac has lived is just sort of unlike any life of anybody I've ever met. I mean, every different essay you have in there is sort of a different kind of job that you had, a different place that you lived. And these are some wild, wild jobs. And so I can only choose where to kind of dig in. And I think like one of the things I'm most interested in this book is masculinity. Mm-hmm. And I think, so I just want to like take a part of this interview and just talk about those issues. So one thing that really struck me is, so we were both definitely in Central Mass in the 90s. And, you know, I was just watching this documentary called Trainwreck on Netflix. It's about the Woodstock 99 festival. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one thing that struck me about that was like the bands that headlined Woodstock 99. It was like Korn and Rage Against the Machine and Metallica. I mean, it was not, you know, whoever, like, you know, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and like Joan Baez, right? Mm-hmm. It was angry. And you get into, in the book, there's this fascinating chapter where you're talking about, you know, Fight Club. And Fight Club came out in 99. And let me just read a quote from the book. Fight Club was about destroying society for the fuck of it. And it resonated. And I mean, I'm reading that and I'm thinking about this documentary and I'm just like, there's a lot of anger in this book that you have personally, and you know, work through your own anger, and you have kind of like personal reasons clearly to be angry, not broader societal ones, but there was something going on in society. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to start there. Like, what was that about, do you think?
I mean, it's such a great question. I mean, it's funny. I'm so glad, one, that you came back to this, because I just, in a weird way, I feel like I almost fumbled. Like I was like, oh, I was hiding that I was good at school. And then I was like, we don't even need to touch what that's about. But like, actually, no. And just for the record, this is how this book got written. When I pitched this book, it was not about this stuff. I had all these other ideas of what I was going to write essays about. But then it became about this because I realized usually when you're saying, oh, I don't need to write about that, I don't need to look directly at that, that's actually probably exactly what you should be writing about. So it's really funny that I just did this, like, oh, we don't need to talk about, like, this is what we should be digging into. Why did I feel this need to hide that I was doing well at school? Was because, especially by societal standards at that time, it was like viewed as uncool, which is wild. And not to be too funny here about a serious topic, but a movie that tackles this extremely well is 21 Jump Street, the reboot with Channing Tatum and Jonah Hill, because they go back. The idea is they go back to school now, and they're trying to be like what you and I thought of as cool, like version, and like everyone in like actual like the young kids are like you got issues. Like we're gonna go do some volunteer work to like help the world. Like we're worried about global warming, and you guys are out here like just like trying to pretend to smoke cigarettes and stuff and try to be tough, right? So I think there was. I mean, such a big question, but like, what was going on? Why was there so much anger at that point? I think, one, just in general, right? Whenever you have teenagers, there is a lot of anger. I myself, one of the things that I did was try to ignore that anger, try to push it down. It's something I really didn't start talking about until I was older. And part of that for me was I was not able to admit what a bad situation I was living in, or I was able to admit it, but I didn't want other people to know about it. I had a real shame around it. So I tried to keep that crushed down. But the other things that, and it's really funny, because I think what Chuck Palahniuk's doing in the original Fight Club movie, and I think what they're trying to do in the original book, and what I think they are trying to do in the film too, is satirize almost that feeling of uselessness that, let's be honest, especially young men feel. There's that very famous Tyler Durden speech where he's like, we were raised to believe we were going to be rock stars and movie stars and this and that, but we're none of them. And so that's where like the rage is coming from, right? But Chuck Palahniuk, I really think, was trying to play with those ideas. But you don't know that when you're 17. You're just like, yeah, I am mad. What the hell? And I just think that the anger, the music, and then what one could argue, like, sorry, not to get like too heady here, but like a popular book in the late 90s and early 2000s was, especially pre 9/11, was The End of History. This book, The End of History, the whole idea was like, we made it. Democracy's won. Things are good, which of course we now know was completely untrue. There was so much grappling with our own American story that still had yet to be done, let alone what was going on around the world. But I think in the 90s, you almost had this feeling of like, to quote what you're just kind of saying, what is the goddamn point? Like, what is, I'm looking for meaning in life and I'm not finding it. And I think that just like sparked with, the early rise of the internet, at which point you get easily shared music. And all of a sudden, you used to have to go and find an album. Like now somebody's like, oh, you think that? You think Rage Against the Machine is blowing your mind? Let me turn you on to this heavy metal. Like, and all of a sudden, we had all this access to all of these things, and we had all this rage, and then quote unquote boredom, which I don't actually think is true. That's like a college course that we could go on forever about. But I think that's what leads to something like Woodstock. I haven't watched. I hear there's 2 great documentaries. I haven't watched them yet, but a friend just recommended them to me because he was like, he's our age as well, and he was just like, I'd kind of forgotten how pissed we kind of all were walking around all the time. And that is this perfect display of, let's call it what it is, white, male, youthful rage that really just became a powder keg at that festival.
Okay, well, speaking of when it became a powder keg, I mean, it did become a powder keg at that festival, and there's a lot of anger in the crowd, and that's like part of what the documentary is about. But let's fast forward 20 years, and we're in a situation right now as a country, and this is getting far beyond the scope of your book, but I think you're so articulate about these things and so thoughtful about anger. I just think you're a good person to ask this because it's on my mind. We're in a period now where there has been a change in our society, and there are a growing number of people who are saying that violence is the answer, and like you can get what you want through your rage. And leaders who are stoking that rage and saying, yes, be angry, because an outburst and a manifestation of this anger is a way to achieve your goal. And that we have seen some evidence already about where that can lead us. And we're not out of the shadow yet. You're somebody who has worked a lot on your own anger, and you're a guy, I mean, folks, like, read this book. I mean, Isaac had his very own fight club. I mean, he was a bouncer. I mean, this dude has been in some rough situations and fought his way out. Yet you're this amazing, like, bookish, thoughtful, generous, kind-hearted guy. It's such an incredible kind of way that you are. But talk to us about, like, what would you say to people who think that violence is the answer? And the one last thing I'll say is, like, often when you see people who are having the hardest time in our society right now and are lashing out with their anger, it's white dudes about our age, And so that's right in our demographic. How can these people be helped thinking about anger?
Yeah, no, it's one, like, to start with the Fight Club, because it's this interesting thing. At the time, I would have told you that we just thought it was fun to, like, throw fists, and, like, we saw it in a movie and we thought it was cool. But it's so clear to me now, and so much of this book was written because I started doing therapy 3 years ago. And my therapist, I've been working on this book forever, but the therapist really helped me draw out some threads that I had not noticed. And one of them was 100%. They basically realized, they're like, look, you were always looking for home because church and home were never safe for you. These places that were supposed to be safe, but you found them in these places that usually people think of as unsafe. But with the Fight Club thing, she so clearly pointed out to me that was like, violence in your home was there and could just come in at any time and roll in like a storm. There's no way of controlling how my day went in my own household. And that was true of many of the people I was growing up with. So that Fight Club was actually an attempt by us to control the violence. We were consenting to that violence. We were agreeing together. We aren't doing this out of anger. We aren't doing this because we got pissed at work or all the other reasons our dads or our moms were violent. We're doing this for us and like almost making it like a communal thing. And so that was where that, now, of course, I would not have been able to tell you that when I was like 16. That is just something that I now can look back and so clearly see. As far as the anger that we're seeing in the country right now, like there's so many different ways to talk about it. And I want to be very careful because there is this part of me that almost wants to point to what we're just saying about Woodstock and just say, this anger's always been there. And I think there's always been people who know how to exploit it. I think there have always been people who either know how to make money off of it or run for political office over it. There has always, and it's not just this generation and it's not just the last generation. This goes back forever, that there's always been a way to get people fired up, to feel like something is being taken away from them, and to then exploit those people. What I would say, and this is something I get into in the penultimate essay in the book, because I do kind of point to this thing, vice, do's, and don'ts, and like the way that I used to worship it, and then to now look at the person that started that was also the same person that started the Proud Boys. And that to watch the Proud Boys as they went from something that just like everyone didn't really take seriously to now being what they are. And again, I don't want to give them too much power because they are just a bunch of angry nerds. But they're angry nerds who keep showing up and keep disrupting things and are going to libraries now and doing all sorts of like really fucking fascist, horrible shit. And so I think it does become almost like a battle for like, you're never going to be able to just like outthink somebody out of their anger, right? It has to be more about giving them something to believe in. And so that's something, I'm not saying that I did it well, but something I'm attempting to do with that penultimate essay in the book, which is, sorry, we can talk about this all day, but I will say, for me, what it comes down is to the belief that you can grow and change. That's what it comes down to for me. I think, and I think this crosses everything. Of course, I'm mainly talking about angry white men right now, but I think across everything, people need to believe that they can grow and that they can change, because I think so much anger that people feel, going back to that Fight Club speech that Paul Enoch wrote, is about feeling stuck. It's about feeling like you're stuck and you just want to blow something up because at least it's different. And we need to teach, and this is something I have felt that way many different times in my life. And what therapy, and again, you can't like ace therapy. It's not like the idea of good and bad, and at least in the therapy that I'm doing, doesn't even really exist. But what it has opened up for me is this door that I can grow and change. That just because I'm a certain age or certain class or I have a certain job or this or that, it doesn't mean that I'm stuck as I am forever. So that's the pitch that I try to make in that essay, is you have to believe that you are capable of growth and change. If you don't feel stuck, there's a chance that maybe you won't feel as angry.
That is just beautiful. That
was your question. I've never talked on that before. I appreciate nobody's focused on that part of the book with me before, so I deeply appreciate it.
Yeah, it's so important though. It's so important. And I just like, your story just kind of keeps coming back to like certain themes. One is finding community, as we talked about. One is just like just relentless optimism, of, you personally and how kind of in any situation you are in, you are able to kind of draw something from it, which is amazing. And the other is just like the willingness to kind of learn and change. And that is sort of what you were just speaking to right there, is like
No, 100%.
becoming unstuck.
And it comes from conversations like this,
Yeah.
like you asking me that and making me think about that, but also so many different conversations. And I touch on that in that essay as well. There's so many people who could have just written me off and had every right to. And that's not to say you can't put the onus of teaching on anyone, right? But I feel so grateful to the people in my life who are friends and loved ones who have taken the time to help me change and grow.
Beautiful. All right. This interview is flying by faster than any interview I've ever done. I'm serious. I thought it was like 2:20.
It's fine because I talk for 20 minutes a question.
All right. We have so many audience questions. Let's just start throwing some up and make sure we get to
I'll try to be quick.
Yeah, here we go. Christina, who was one of the people who was getting on me, one of our fans who wanted us to talk. So thank you for that, Christina.
Thank you, Christina.
What was the difficult part of the book to tackle, and how did you face it?
I mean, listen, that gets back to exactly, I can do this one real quick because we kind of touched on it there for a second, which is originally this book was going to be about, like the whole steady essay is the best example of what the whole thing was going to be about, which is us take something from popular culture. I sprinkle just petite trauma, just petite, just a little sentence or two to allude to a dark past. Yeah. But then I'm looking at the pop culture thing and how I relate to it. The more and more I wrote, the more and more I was like, and this is the 7th paragraph about my father, about my mother. And I realized that I wasn't looking at the things that I actually should be writing about. So the most difficult part for me, for real, I had this whole thing finished. That first essay and last essay, which bookend the books, there's a reason why they do that. For the record, in my mind, they are one big essay because that's how I wrote it. And then I split it in the middle and I stuck the first half in the front and I stuck the second half in the back. That was the hardest essay to write, not just because I didn't want to face it. It was also the thing that I could never admit to myself that my therapist told me, which is, what is this book? It's me trying to communicate with my parents. That's all this. And to be honest, and my therapist was like, if you had come to me sooner, we could have handled this a lot easier. That didn't involve major publishing. Like you could actually have some real conversation. But that led me to writing this piece, and it was so difficult and so hard. But the gift that I got around it, and then I'll stop, is my family has been so supportive of this book. They've been so accepting. People who have stories like that, mine very often run into a lot of hardship from their family. My family has been so loving, so supportive, and that has meant the world to me. And so the fact that I did the extremely difficult part of this has actually led to the thing that's real. No offense to this book, but this book is an art object that then other people will interact with and make their own stories about, right? My family, my life, that's real. And we're having better conversations because of this book.
That's beautiful. All right, let's get another question in there. Do you have a soundtrack for your book? If so, what is it?
Okay, here we go. We can do this real quick. Hold Steady, Mountain Goats for sure. Elliott Smith has got to be in there. Listen, it's gonna be a little bit of a wild one, but we're gonna go on a Lil Wayne tangent. There was a lot of Lil Wayne in my life. I'm just gonna be honest about that. At one point, I like one of those cheap old iPods, and all I had on it was Lil Wayne and Elliott Smith and the Mountain Goats, and somebody was like, "You are either the most hyped up or the saddest person I've ever met," depending on what you're listening to. We got to throw Eminem in there.
You can be both. You can be both.
Yeah, you can be both. Eminem's an incredible lyricist. He's an incredible rapper. I mentioned him in the book, and then like a few lines later, I mentioned that I'm listening to bad rap. That's my number one fear, is that Eminem thinks I meant him. No, he's one of the best. What else? Let's give one more to the soundtrack. Who sings "I Could Drink a Case of You"? Joni Mitchell. I mean, there's a lot of covers. Anyways, whoever the woman that I could drink a case of you. Boom, done.
Awesome. All right, here we go. Let's get another audience question up there. Let's do 2 more quick ones. What does it feel like to be a New York Times bestseller? How did you find out, and what did you do?
All right, we're going to do this one real quick, too. I'm still processing it. I have 3 weeks out. I've now been able to at least accept it. This was my dream. I'm going to be honest. It was a very small dream. I didn't say it aloud to anyone. I didn't ever tweet it. I would whisper it to myself in moments of loneliness. Even as people seem to be taking well to the book, the New York Times could have assigned it to anyone. They assigned it to Michael Ian Black, which again, if he had panned it, that would have been that, and they would have ran that too. But just the fact that they assigned it to somebody like that meant they would take it seriously, and that was just a huge kindness. So it was starting to think maybe it could happen, but I was thinking 15, 14, if it hit at all, and that still seemed like a long shot. To find out that I hit it, and then to find out that I hit it at number 2, I'm going to be very honest. You think that the reaction might be popping champagne or something. We're going to get into a quick theory. Like I believe there are people out there who all attention. We don't need to name names. We all know who I'm talking about. But like all attention feels good, even if it's bad. And I think some of those people are drawn to politics, et cetera, et cetera. But all attention, no matter if it's good or bad, feels good. For me, I think I have something that's opposite, which is I'm really thinking about a lot of my life choices and why I chose this career as I come into my 40s. I'm 39 now, and I'm like, what? A lot of attention is very hard for me. And so to realize that many people were connecting with the book, were reading the book, were buying the book was overwhelming. So my first reaction was truly, I was in LA and I looked at my friend and I was like, I could just walk into the woods or the sea. But luckily I was with a very good friend who said, hey, put your phone down. He has a motorcycle. He has a little sidecar. And he was like, get in the sidecar. We're going to go for a motorcycle ride. And he took me through a ride for the hills and it like calmed me down. So that was that.
Wow. So, I mean, let's just do one more question from the audience. But I mean, like, one of the things that I was just sort of most interested in was like what the feedback, and we'll get to that question in 1 second, but like, what the feedback has been. It sounds like you got feedback from your family that was very positive. I know that this is a big, karma of the universe kind of thing where there's all this love suddenly pouring back to you as you've poured out love for other people. But what would you say is like the very best piece of feedback, or the best piece of inbound feedback you got?
I mean, listen, I can be very honest. There's so many writers that I've admire have sent me kind notes or gave me kind blurb, but it's going to come down to this one moment, which was in San Francisco. A lot of my old friends were there. I used to live out there. So a lot of people in the line were like catching up with me or saying hi, or it was a writer who maybe I hadn't met, like somebody, a wonderful writer whose book I'd recommended on the Today Show swung by and was like, hey, there's this person just standing in the back of the line. They got closer and closer at the very end. He just said to me, hey, look, I'm not a writer. I'm not one of your old bar buddies. I don't know you at all. And I was like, okay. And he was like, but I love that event. And I'm buying your book. I haven't read it yet. But I was told by a friend who read it, and he's telling our entire friendship group that we all got to be reading this. He's like, I haven't read a book in a year, but I like that event. I'm buying a copy. And that, like, totally unconnected for me, didn't come from a review, just word of mouth, people saying, hey, you got to read this book to another buddy. That one really meant the world to me.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah. All right, let's do one last audience question. And then we'll wrap. Let's see. Okay, this is from Jenna Blum. Oh my God, what a setup! Mark thinks that Worcester, Mass, is the home of the diner. Discuss. Jenna, for the record, believes that New Jersey somehow invented. I don't know what they invented. It wasn't a diner, but
This is what I'll say. We didn't even talk heroes and grinders, but I love heroes. I love grinders. I love bubbler. That's what I call a water fountain. Ooh, that was a lot of confusion when you got into weed. What? Why are people passing a water fountain around? I don't get this. Anyways, this is what I'll say to that. I think local legends are so important. I cannot tell you where the diner came from. I can tell you that at the Buena Vista in San Francisco with a beautiful view of the bay, they think they invited the Irish coffee. It's a damn good one. Maybe they even did. I don't know. But what I do know is that I love to go there, and they'll even say it's a little secret. It's not on the menu, but you can actually order one to go. They'll give you the little mixture and the coffee, and then they'll sell you a little closed bottle it's something do. Anyways, and you can go and you can mix it and you can drink it yourself. Is that the original Irish coffee? I don't know. But I love that place and I love that story. So I think Worcester can be the original diner. I think New Jersey. I'm not a historian. I'm more into stories. And so I think there's room for both. Also, just real quick, I saw that across there was like, what's your favorite place to visit in Massachusetts? I just want to be real clear about that, which is the ocean. Absolutely. Absolutely. My favorite. I've been in California, the sandy beaches, God bless them. I love a rocky shoreline. I love being anywhere. I grew up in the rivers and the hills towns. I think Massachusetts is beautiful, don't get me wrong, but the favorite place for me to go to calm down, like the Fisherman's Bethel comes to mind, but like the ocean.
Yeah, awesome. Love it. All right, man. Well, look, we're going to wrap.
Mark, we could have done this for 3 more hours.
I feel like I just got started, man. I kept like setting my pages aside. I'm like, not going to ask that question, not going to ask that question.
You'll come back down to Brooklyn, or when I'm going up there, we'll meet up. We'll link up.
Beautiful. All right, well, look, this is the book, everybody. Please open another browser on your tab. We put the link to buy it through bookshop.org in the chat. Please buy 6 or 7 copies. It's great. Give it to all your friends. And I love, by the way, I just love, this is like a book that anybody could enjoy this book, but I particularly love taking on masculinity and kind of men's issues and things like that, and just doing it in the thoughtful way that you do. This is just totally the kind of book that I think needs to be out there right now. And I think like what being a man is and what being a thoughtful bro is or whatever is just something that's very much up for debate and changing a lot. And this book is like totally part of that dialogue. So I really appreciate that.
I so appreciate it. And I so appreciate that you're making spaces for these and everything that you do for books. So Mark, thank you for that. You got it.
All right. Now, before you go, one last question. I love asking this to everybody that comes on the show. So just imagine, if you will, that there's an ideal reader for Dirtbag, Massachusetts. And this reader is just receiving your book in like just in your wildest dreams, the best way anybody could have received it. And so imagine this ideal reader finishes the book, they close it, it's sitting on their lap. Just describe, if you can, in a phrase or even a word, what is the feeling that this reader has?
The answer for that for me is I'm just picturing me at 14. The book is in soft cover because Lord knows I wasn't getting my hands on hardcovers. The book is in soft cover and it's like stuffed in their back pocket. But it doesn't have to be me. I'm just saying any young reader out there, just any young reader out there, it's stuffed in their back pocket. They finished it and they just feel a little less alone. That's all I want.
I love that. Thank you so much, Isaac. This has been great. I feel less alone right now. I hope everybody who is watching and all you people who are commenting that you feel less alone. Hey, this is the book community, folks. Book people are warm people, and there's a kindred spirit here. So thank you for coming on the show, and congratulations on all your success, Isaac.
I deeply appreciate it, Mark, and thank you for having me.
You got it. All right, folks, we will see you soon on The Thoughtful Bro. Thanks, everybody, for joining.